Archive, the place where we take these really challenging stacks of data and try to pull out the most essential insights.
It's good to be here.
And today we are undertaking a truly fascinating mission. We're diving deep into the spiritual and religious landscape of the United States.
It's such an essential topic because the whole landscape is just defined by contradiction.
Right.
We have this compelling stack of recent national surveys from Pew, Barna, Arizona Christian University, and they sort of paint a picture of accelerating secularization and surprising signs of revival.
Both at the same time.
Exactly.
That dual narrative is precisely what we need to unpack. The numbers, when you look at them one by one, tell a story, but when you zoom out.
You see this massive internal contradiction in American belief.
Exactly. But before we get into the decline, we have to set the stage. We have to acknowledge the prevailing spiritual reality across the entire country.
Yeah, the foundational concept, the one thing you have to grasp to understand any of this is syncretism.
Syncretism.
For decades, it's been the dominant worldview. It's not about choosing one faith. It's about blending elements from multiple worldviews.
So like secular humanism, traditional faith.
Right, or New Age spirituality, political ideology, you name it. You blend them into a highly customized individual philosophy of life.
So spiritual customization is the absolute norm.
Absolutely. The American Worldview Inventory research from ACU, it just shows the sheer dominance of this. They found that syncretism is present in a staggering 92% of American adults.
92%.
Which means only a tiny fraction, maybe 4%, hold what you would call a coherent biblical theism worldview.
Wow. That is a truly profound number. It means that when we talk about a self-identified Christian, for example, we just can't assume a consistent set of beliefs anymore.
Not at all. You're dealing with someone who has, mixed and matched their spiritual reality.
And this fragmentation, it has to color every single statistic we're about to discuss.
Precisely. If we don't start by acknowledging that customization is the foundation, we're going to misunderstand all the shifts completely.
Okay, so let's start with the narrative we hear most often, that undeniable long-term decline in traditional faith. What does the Pew Religious Landscape Study tell us?
Well, the decline is massive over that span. Back in 2007, you had 78% of U.S. adults who identified as Christian.
Okay, pretty high.
By the 2023-24 findings, that figure had dropped a full 16 percentage points.
Down to 62%.
To 62%. That's a huge shift in just over a decade and a half.
But the data also shows some nuance in the timeline, right? It wasn't a straight line down.
It does. While the overall drop is huge, the sharpest decline actually happened in the earlier period, between, say, 2007 and 2014. Since about 2019 or 2020, the Christian share has shown signs of stabilizing. It's moving within a tighter band now, roughly 60 to 64%.
So the pace of outright abandonment seems to have slowed down.
It has. And that's that first piece of contradiction we're seeing in the sources.
And the flip side of that coin, of course, is the rise of the religiously unaffiliated, the group everyone calls the nones.
Right. The nones, atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. That's the key demographic story of this whole era. They grew from 16% in 2007 to 29% today.
Almost a third of the country.
Almost a third. But, like the Christian decline, their growth rate has also flattened out a bit in the most recent surveys.
Which contributes to that overall picture of stabilization you mentioned.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me with the demographics. The data on religious switching is it's so one-sided, this great switch.
It really is.
For every single person who converts to Christianity in the U.S., there are 6 former Christians leaving the faith.
That 6-to-1 ratio is a profound indicator of momentum, of institutional momentum. And that long-term trend is driven primarily by, not just switching, but by generational replacement.
Generational replacement, meaning as older, more religious groups pass away, they're replaced by younger groups who are just dramatically less religious from the get-go.
That's it. Let's just break down the sheer scale of that gap.
Yeah, let's do that.
If you look at the oldest adults, those 74 and older, 80% of them identify as Christian.
80%. Okay.
Now compare that to the youngest adults, 18 to 24. For them, it's only 46%.
Wow. So almost double the rate of Christian identity in the oldest group.
It's a stark contrast. And the unaffiliated numbers tell the inverse story.
I bet.
Only 13% of that 74-plus group are nones, compared to a massive 43% of the 18 to 24-year-olds.
That's more than a threefold difference.
It is. And what's fascinating here is what it implies for the future. Unless these young people suddenly get way more religious as they get older.
Which does that typically happen?
Not really. Long-term data tracking hasn't shown that young people suddenly develop deep religious commitment just because they age. So future declines seem almost baked in.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to the core of this fragmentation problem. We need to move beyond just affiliation, who people say they are, to what they actually believe.
Yeah.
If 92% of adults are syncretic, what is the actual content of their custom-made faith?
This is where you see the collapse of any kind of shared theological ground.
Yeah.
Let's look at belief in the traditional God of the Bible.
Okay.
In the early 1990s, 3 out of 4 American adults, 73% who believed in a supreme power, said, yep, that's the God of the Bible.
73%. And now?
Now, 3 decades later, that figure has plummeted to just 40%.
40. So it's a minority view now.
It's a minority view among people who believe in higher power at all. It's a tectonic shift.
So if that shared belief system has eroded, what are people replacing that singular deity with? The ACU Barna research identified, 4 different competing views?
Yeah, 4 distinct perspectives, so we can break it down. Only 46% of the population today picked the traditional singular deity statement.
Which is?
There is only one supreme spiritual being. He created and rules everything in existence. Less than half the country holds that basic monotheistic premise.
And the rest are spread out across these other ideas.
They are. The data shows 17% who view humans as divine beings. And 14% specifically believe that God is the total realization of personal human potential.
So divinity is something inside of you. It's about self-fulfillment.
Exactly. It ties directly into that syncretic mix-and-match approach we talked about. It's about personal empowerment, spirituality as self-help.
And the others.
Then you have about 8% who say there are multiple gods. And the fastest-growing segment, now at 29%, just rejects supernatural authority altogether.
The agnostics and atheists.
Right, and that group has jumped up from just 8% 3 decades ago.
But the truly shocking revelation in this data, the part that just proves that 92% syncretism figure, it has to be what's happening inside the self-identified Christian community.
It is stunning. It's proof of fragmentation inside the tent. Only 60% of people who call themselves Christians actually believe in that statement about one supreme being.
So wait, 40%, 4 out of 10 self-described Christians.
Believe in multiple gods, or that humans are divine, or hold some other view that's contrary to, basic Christian theology.
So the label Christian is rapidly losing its theological meaning. It's becoming more of a cultural or maybe an ancestral descriptor.
It goes even deeper. The researchers have this specific segment they track. Theologically defined born-again Christians.
Okay, so a much stricter definition.
Much stricter. These are people who meet certain criteria like accepting Jesus as their savior, being certain of going to heaven because of it, even within that group.
Yeah.
1 out of every 4, 23%, still holds contrary views of God. They see him as something other than the unique, singular creator.
That is just profound fragmentation. But okay, we shouldn't assume the nuns are all the same either, right? I mean, a lack of affiliation doesn't necessarily mean a lack of belief.
That's a critical distinction to make. The Pew Nones report found that only 29% of nuns reject the idea of any higher power or spiritual force.
So the majority of them do believe in something.
The majority of nuns still believe in God or some other higher power, and about half say spirituality is important in their lives.
So for many nuns, it's not a rejection of belief, it's a rejection of the institution.
That's the crux of it. They might say organized religion does some harm, intolerance, superstition.
But they also see that it can provide meaning and purpose.
Exactly. So belief is still widespread, but the organized traditional structure is what's being rejected.
Which raises a big question. If belief is individualized and structure is rejected, where does that spiritual curiosity go?
Well, that leads us right to the most exciting contradiction in our source material.
Right. Decline everywhere, but
Yeah.
a surprising resurgence of interest. The Barna Group data on church attendance, they call it a historic reversal.
And it truly challenges that dominant narrative that younger generations are just abandoning religion en masse.
Okay, tell us about it.
Gen Z and millennials are now the most regular churchgoers. They're actually outpacing older generations like boomers and elders.
Wait, really? Outpacing them?
Yes, whose attendance rates have been steadily declining for the last 25 years.
So the age group that everyone characterizes as cynical about institutions is now the one showing up the most. What are the numbers on that increase?
The shift is remarkable. The typical Gen Z churchgoer now attends 1.9 weekends per month. Millennials are at 1.8 times per month.
And that's nearly double the rates from just a few years ago.
It is nearly double what we saw around 2020.
So why? What is driving this sudden increase in, physical attendance among the youngest adults?
Analysts point to a few factors, mostly related to the post-pandemic world. Younger people, especially Gen Z, report much higher rates of isolation and social anxiety.
Mm,
And the church, even if it doesn't totally align with their syncretic beliefs, offers something tangible, a predictable sense of community, of physical belonging.
a relief from the digital, isolated world.
Exactly. They're seeking structure and connection, and a physical gathering spot, well, it fulfills that need.
That makes perfect sense. So they're rejecting the belief system, maybe, but accepting the communal structure as a kind of psychological tool.
Yeah.
But even with this youth spike, what's the reality for church leaders on a weekly basis?
It's crucial to contextualize it. While the youth resurgence is significant, if you look at the average church adult across all generations, they only attend about 1.6 times per month.
So roughly 2 out of 5 weekends.
Right. Which means those old weekly rhythms, they can no longer be assumed. The whole pattern of religious life has changed from a 7-day cycle to more of a sporadic monthly check-in.
So if we connect this all together, it suggests this intense spiritual curiosity and a desire for belonging.
Which is a massive opportunity for engagement. But the research is clear. Church-going alone does not create discipleship or deep theological commitment.
Because of syncretism, they're bringing their customized worldviews with them into the pews.
Exactly. They aren't necessarily adopting the theology being preached from the pulpit.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the intersection of all these trends and the political sphere. This is arguably where the stakes are highest, where faith identity is being actively used as a cultural marker.
Right, and this brings us to the concept of cultural Christianity.
What's the definition we're working with here?
Cultural Christians, as analyzed in our sources, are defined by allegiance to a cultural identity that's based on Christianity. They often prioritize alignment with political power over strict theological adherence.
So they're described as twisting scripture to fit the culture when doctrine and politics conflict.
That's the analysis. And we see clear data showing how this trend fuels intense political polarization.
How so?
The decline of Christian identity has been way more pronounced among ideological liberals. It's dropped 25 points since 2007 for them.
Well, for a conservative.
Conservatives have largely maintained their Christian identification over that same period. So you end up with a highly politicized religious map.
And this asymmetry creates a vacuum where, according to the analysis we're looking at, political rhetoric can really leverage that Christian identity.
It can. And critics argue this has led to political movements that conflate national identity with very specific religious views, sometimes threatening that traditional separation of church and state.
And we have to report on this analysis impartially. Some sources view the Image agenda, which has heavy support from right-wing Christians, as trying to construct a morally exclusive vision of American identity.
Yes, the analysis suggests that rhetoric associated with the movement promotes a yearning for a white Christian America.
And critics argue that this works to erode secularism and democracy.
And, for example, that rhetoric is seen by these critics as mobilizing white Christian nationalism and trying to redefine religious freedom to privilege conservative Christian views above all others.
This analysis seems to dovetail with criticism of Project 2025, that blueprint supported by over 100 conservative groups.
It does. Critics argue that plan seeks to impose a narrow, specific religious worldview on policy across the entire executive branch of government.
And the critique is that this blueprint would actively suppress the religious freedom of other faiths in favor of one conservative Christian platform.
Yes, and the examples they give of policy concerns include things like seeking to revoke approval for the abortion pill, like for Stone, or rescinding federal regulations that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
So this is how that abstract theological fragmentation we talked about translates directly into these very concrete political battles.
It does. And in this polarized context, religious language can be transformed into a political identity marker. It distinguishes, as analysts say, true Americans from liberal, secular others.
Creating a situation where the performance of faith, meaning political allegiance, can sometimes replace the actual practice of faith.
And religious loyalty becomes synonymous with political allegiance.
Okay, so to synthesize this whole complex journey we've just taken, the American spiritual landscape is defined by this massive fragmentation.
Right. Syncretism is dominating 92% of worldviews. We see deep structural generational divides. Younger people are far less traditionally religious.
Suggesting likely future decline. But Critically,
Critically, we also see a stabilizing trend in the overall numbers, and this surprising new interest in church attendance among Gen Z and millennials, driven by a search for community.
what's absolutely clear is that we're moving past a world where a single unified definition of Christian or religious holds true for most people.
Not anymore. People are actively customizing their faith, worshiping multiple deities, or a personalized version of a higher power. Even many 90s still prioritize spirituality.
The complexity is profound. It makes a simple religious label almost meaningless without asking, what's the actual content of that belief?
It really does.
So, given that religious identity is increasingly being used as this critical political and cultural marker, how will the growing spiritual pluralism and the mix and match faith of the average American shape our political culture in the coming decade, especially as syncretism continues its 92% dominance? What are the implications when defining national identity becomes less about shared theological beliefs and more about shared political allegiance?
That's the question.
And that's something for you to chew on until our next deep dive.